What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Strength Coach Rants. I'm your host, Connor Lyons, and today we're going to be talking about in-season conditioning.
I don't want to hear you, 'cause you cannot master the strength.
All right, so it's January 7th. We just got done with our Christmas and New Year's break. Most of the high school kids are back in school. College kids are either heading back or are already back. So we are in season for most sports. We're either gearing up to be in season like baseball, or we are right in the middle of our seasons for sports like hockey and basketball. Football is really the only sport that's out of season right now. And to be completely honest, there is no off season anymore because football has even got 7-on-7s that are mandatory throughout certain times of the year. Hockey's got spring and summer hockey. Volleyball season is year round. Baseball has all summer long. They're playing club baseball, and then they've got fall ball, and now their seasons are about to start. So I just sent a couple kids back to their baseball teams, and if this year is like any other year, it is going to end up with all of them losing strength, losing speed, losing power due to the fact that they are going to be conditioning like a bunch of dummies because you've got baseball coaches running these conditioning drills. And it doesn't have to be that way. And today what we're going to do is we're going to take the demands of the sport, so like average play times, all that stuff, like how much distance is covered on the field during practices. We're going to take all that information and kind of compare it to the ways that these teams traditionally would condition, right? So like with hockey, we've got the Herb Brooks drill is like the most popular one. It's like you're near blue line, back to the goal line, center ice, back to the goal line, far blue line, back to the goal line, far goal line, back to the goal line. And you're supposed to do this within 45 seconds. And that is supposed to mimic a shift on the ice, right? And then football, we've got gassers, half gassers, 110s. Again, we're going to go over why this is all asinine today. Soccer would be the sport that I've spent the least amount of time with, but I mean, it is a sport where conditioning is a little bit more important from a cardiovascular standpoint, that's what I'm looking for, like an aerobic perspective, whereas a lot of these other sports, it's not nearly as important. Baseball players are running poles. I know pitching coaches that make these kids run miles because they think that's somehow going to make them a better baseball player, and it's just not the case. And we're going to go over all of that today. In addition to how long these adaptations take to get, and then how long we hold on to them. So hopefully by the end of this episode, you're going to have a much better understanding of how you as an athlete or you as a coach can get yourself prepared for the season and even during the season. All right, so we're going to start this episode by going over adaptation. We're going to talk about two things: how long these adaptations take to acquire, and then how long they stick around for after we acquire them. So I'm going to pull up a graphic here. If you're listening and you're not watching, we're going to go over all this anyway, so it's not a huge deal. But basically, there's 5 adaptations that we're looking at when we talk about cardiovascular conditioning. There's VO2 max. It's going to be blood volume and cardiac output. Different changes in the mitochondria, capillary distance, capillary density, muscular endurance, and those are the 5 things that we really want to look at when we're talking about conditioning. Now, understand that when we are talking about this, VO2 max has been shown to not have a ton of carryover to sport. For instance, the NHL used to do a VO2 max test. I think they still do it, but there was talk at one point about them getting rid of it at their combine because the guys who did well at it tended to not do well at the NHL level. And the reason for that is it's different energy systems. Having a high VO2 max isn't necessarily going to be of any not any benefit, but not any extra benefit to you as an athlete if you're playing a team sport versus if you're a marathon runner, obviously high VO2 max, you're Ironman, you're doing something that involves a ton of endurance, that VO2 max is going to be super important, right? But these adaptations collectively are the result of what we would classically or traditionally call conditioning. All right. And this first one, VO2 max, that's basically the efficiency of your heart. If you've ever seen the old Gatorade commercials or the guys I don't think they do a VO2 max test at the combine, or at least they never used to for the NFL rather. But they've got the mask on and they're running. It was the old 50 Cent in the club music video, 50 Cent was running on a treadmill while wearing a mask. That was a VO2 max test. And what it does is it measures the amount of oxygen that you're able to take in as in addition to like your heart rate and some other things as you go through this test. So it starts off very slow and then it starts to get faster and faster. And then you go on an incline and it takes all that information. It gives you a number. So just think VO2 max equals efficiency of the heart. These adaptations typically to an increase in VO2 max typically take about 2 to 3 weeks to kind of start, right? So you can, and that's going from like a baseline of 0 in 2 to 3 weeks, like you can see some pretty significant change. Now you're not going to be like a marathon runner in 2 to 3 weeks, but you're going to see some significant changes in that VO2 max. That's why when I have kids like at my gym, and they're like, why aren't we conditioning? And it's May and their season doesn't start until August. It's because they don't take that long. We can quote unquote condition as we get closer to the season, because right now it doesn't make sense to waste that energy conditioning when we could be using that energy to get stronger, more powerful, or faster. So again, 2 to 3 weeks. Now that doesn't mean, again, that you're going to be a marathon runner in 2 to 3 weeks. That means you can see some significant change in the efficiency of your heart in that 2 to 3 weeks of like your quote unquote conditioning training and or weight training and playing your sport. So if you've ever gone and run a mile before and you were exhausted the first time, right? You had to walk some of it. You couldn't run all of it. It took you like 15 minutes to walk a mile and you felt like you were going to die afterwards. In a week, if you run that same mile like every other day, you feel significantly better. And that's one of the reasons, in addition to a lot of these other things. And so those VO2 max adaptations, they'll last up to like 7 to 14 days, so 1 to 2 weeks with no training at all. So once you get your VO2 max to a specific height, a specific place, I guess, because I don't know why I said height, you're going to be able to hold on to that for 7 to 14 days without training. Now, this training includes practicing and playing. So that's going to be something that you maintain for a good while. That means we don't need to do this every day. We don't need to do this every week. We just need to make sure that we're pushing ourselves in practice. All right. And I'll go into a lot more in depth to all of that in a bit here in this episode. I feel like this is going to be a long one. The next one we're going to go to is blood volume and cardiac output. So there's 2 different things there. These adaptations, so like within 1 to 2 days, you're going to see an increase in that, like your blood plasma volume, meaning that there's like more liquid there to carry more substrates, kind of gets your body ready to deliver more red blood cells. But those red blood cells take about 2 to 3 weeks to start seeing an increase in those. Now that can be like supercharged by sleeping in a hyperbaric chamber or taking erythropoietin, or better known as EPO or EPO. But it takes about 3 to 4 weeks to see that increase in red blood cells. And the reason that's important is because that's what carries the oxygen to the working muscles. If you have more blood volume and you have more red blood cells, you're going to be able to push more oxygen to the working muscles, meaning you're going to be able to go for longer. That's the way it works. And now those adaptations will stay for 1 to 2 weeks. And again, that's 1 to 2 weeks of like not training. That doesn't include you like practicing and training and all of that. So you're able to maintain those. If you did nothing for 2 weeks, 1 to 2 weeks, let's say 7 days, just to keep it clean, you're gonna be fine. Next one we're gonna go to is our mitochondria. So if you've ever taken biology in high school, you know the mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell, right? And so those are going to be important when it comes to cardiovascular conditioning, because it's the powerhouse of the cell. It creates like all the energy, all the aerobic energy that you're gonna need. You'll see an increase in enzyme activity within 8 to 10 days of like training, specifically for cardiovascular endurance. And then you'll see an increase in the density of those mitochondria in 2 to 4 weeks. So again, we're talking about less than a month for all 3 of these all 3 of these so far, that we're going to be able to see an increase in those things. And now again, mitochondria, both that density and the enzyme activity, you'll hold on to those for about 7 to 10 days of doing nothing, right? And that doesn't mean that. So actually, this one does. This is the one where you're going to see a pretty significant drop in the fact that, like, if you use it, you're going to lose it. You see upwards of a 50% drop in those 7 to 10 days of not training. Again, doesn't include practice or games. So, but it roughly a week. All right. Capillary density, right? The capillaries are where all the blood from your arteries eventually makes it to the capillaries to kind of disperse throughout the muscle and the tissue that needs it. You're going to see like an increase in capillary density, or the amount of capillaries that you have, in about 2 to 3 weeks. All right. So again, like less than a month, and you're going to hold on to that because this is a process that like takes some energy on your body's part. You're going to hang on to that for like several weeks to months. And that's like without training. So that's something that's going to stick around for a pretty significant amount of time. The last one here is muscular endurance, right? And 7 to 10 days, you're going to see an increase in muscular endurance. That's of training. You can do that in the gym. You can do that sprinting, running, whatever it is you're doing. You're going to see an increase in your ability to perform that in 7 to 10 days, which is wild. And again, I have kids that train here, and they'll go off and they come back in. And for the first week that we're here, it's like a volume beatdown session. It feels almost cruel, and like we're just doing hard things for the sake of doing hard things. But we crank that volume up, and then we're able to peel back a week later, and they are in a significantly better position because we have kind of forced those adaptations to come on pretty quickly, and they're able to hold on to those adaptations for 4 to 8 weeks. So that's almost 2 months of doing nothing. And again, you're not doing nothing because you're playing and you're practicing and hopefully still training. You're able to hold on to those for 4 to 8 weeks. All right. And so just in total, on average, you're going to have about 30 days of these adaptations. All right. Not going to maintain 100% of them, but in about 30 days, that's when you'll really start to see all of them really kind of start to go away. And that's 30 days of doing nothing. Again, we're not doing nothing because we are playing and practicing. All right. So that's how long these adaptations last. And when you condition, these are the adaptations that you're going after. So try to keep that in mind as we kind of move forward into your season. You think like, yeah, this is probably like the biggest issue I see with youth coaches today is you're 3-4 months into the season and you start falling off at the end of games where maybe you're losing the third period or the second half or the fourth quarter. And all of a sudden now you're like, we're just not conditioned. That is absolute nonsense. You are plenty conditioned. What you lack now is strength, speed, and power because you've been conditioning these kids and they've been away from the gym for so long that they're going to start to fall off. It has absolutely nothing to do with their conditioning and everything to do with their ability to generate force and do it over and over and over again. So, moral of the last 10 minutes here. These adaptations come on 1 to 2 weeks, ballpark, some of them a little bit longer, and you're going to hold on to them for about 30 days. So if that's the case, if they come on pretty quickly and they're not very fleeting, you'll hold on to them for a while. It would make sense that we probably don't need to condition and practice quite as much as we think we do. We don't need to dedicate that 10 minutes at the end of practice to just mindless running. If it's not going to benefit us in any way, we could take that 10 minutes and do something significantly more beneficial for ourselves or our athletes, as opposed to just doing hard things for the sake of doing hard things. All right. All right. Now I'm going to pull that graphic down. Hopefully you got a better understanding of that. The next one that we're going to go into, all right, is the distance covered in practice, all right, and the average duration. Now I've only got 6 sports here. Lacrosse was probably the biggest one that I left off, but they're actually not all that far off. If you were to combine like the skills, the skill distances in football, like your skill players, so like receivers, DBs, anybody outside the box, they're not going to differ too much from them there. And then the average play duration is actually the equivalent of basketball. All right, so just think that if you're a lacrosse player and you're looking at this. All right, so on the and again, if you're just watching and you're just listening and you're not watching, there's a graphic on the screen. Don't worry, I'm going to go over all of it. But this is, again, the distance covered in practice versus the average play duration, right? So on the left-hand side of this, you've got your duration of average duration of play. So in tennis, that's 3 to 10 seconds. And again, at the youth level, I've read studies that show it's below 3 seconds. I've seen as low as 2.4 seconds on average. Baseball plays are going to last anywhere from 4 seconds. And again, it could last significantly less. A ground out to first base could take 2 seconds, right? So it's just the averages. Hockey play is going to last somewhere between 32 and 65 seconds, all right? And I'll link in the description. I did an entire episode on energy systems in hockey. There's actually 2 of them because I gave a presentation about it as well. I'll link those in the description. Basketball is going to be 12 to 14 seconds on average per play. Soccer is going to be 32 to 65 seconds. And then football is going to be 4 to 6 seconds. And again, youth tends to be on the lower side of this on average, right? So one thing this graph doesn't show is what's the word I'm looking for? Like your average output, all right, during that time, right? So in tennis, 3 to 10 seconds, you're not all out effort the entire time. Granted, the ball comes back at you pretty quick, but there's a little bit of recovery time in there where you're not going all out. You're not like consistent 10 seconds of push, right? There's like a little bit of break here and there. So just understand that. Baseball, it's the same thing. You could be on the field and not move during those 4 to 5 seconds, or you could be running the bases and be sprinting the entire time. Hockey, again, I'll link in the description, but that 32 to 65 seconds, you're looking at, like, on average, about 7 to 8 seconds of all-out effort. Most of the shift is actually spent in a 2-foot glide or at low intensity or backward skating. Basketball, very similar to like hockey in the sense that not every second of every play are you all out effort. There's a lot of like active recovery time or standing or like kind of jarring for position. So keep that in mind. Soccer is really like position dependent, and it's really how good is your team dependent. For instance, like a defenseman on a really good offensive team may not get much work at all, whereas those, the forwards on that side are getting a lot more work. It really depends, but just think you could go 10 seconds of like all out effort followed by 30 seconds of like active recovery and a walk or a jog. And then football, 4 to 6 seconds, you're looking at a play, right? Let's say it's a running play. It takes 3 seconds, 4 seconds, you get stopped pretty quick. You're up on your feet and you're walking to the line, you get 30 seconds of a play clock, right? So could be all out effort again. It's pretty position, dependent here. Whereas a blocking receiver on a run play might have a lot of work, whereas a wide receiver isn't doing much. The only guys that are pretty consistently always getting crushed are the linemen. Every play they're hitting or getting hit. So just that's that. All right, so on the right side of this chart, you have the distance on average covered in miles during a practice or a training session. So in tennis, on average, it's about 3 to 5 miles of movement. That's quite a bit. That's a lot, right? Running back and forth on a court and up and down on a court is going to take quite. So this is also, let me preface this, not including like conditioning. This is just skills and moving on the court, all right? Baseball is a little bit less. You're looking at 1 to 2 miles, whereas the pitchers are going to be on the high end because their coaches are going to make them condition. And this one was the one that I found, the one stat that actually did include conditioning. Guys in the field, approximately 1 mile, sometimes less. There's a lot of standing around, especially during BP. Baseball is a funny sport like that. Basketball, you're looking at 1 to 2 miles. That's, up and down the court. That's side to side. Every step contributes to this mile. It'd be about 1 to 2 miles. Soccer, anywhere from 1 to 7 miles. Now, again, that's pretty like position dependent. If you're like a midfielder, you're going to be running a lot more. If you're a goalie, you'll be near that 1. But like field players are going to be somewhere between 5 and 7 miles on average. And goalies will be between 1 and 2 miles on average, which is kind of wild. Like they don't have as big a space to move in, but the fact that they're still running or moving 1 to 2 miles is kind of wild. And then football, you're looking at 1 to 3 miles. Now, your skill guys who are running routes, they're going to run significantly more, so you're looking at like 2 to 3. Linemen will be less than 1 mile typically because you're only moving like maybe 3, 4, 5 yards at a time. And then QBs are going to be 1 to 2 miles. Because again, they're not running routes the same way that like the skill guys are, or the cornerbacks who are having to defend those routes. So these sports all have pretty like high mileage when you look at it, right? An average play is going to be anywhere, if you take all of these, from 3 to 65 seconds long. All right. But their mileage also is anywhere from 1 to 7 miles, right? So you can say on average like 3.5 miles, and on average about 30 seconds, right? Even though most of these are significantly less than that. The reason I'm putting this here is because if you look at this mileage and look at the average play duration, and then think about the average effort duration, and then tell me that there is any benefit to running miles, or even running like 110s or gassers or skating Herbies, right? Tell me that that's beneficial. Like you can't do it. There's no benefit to this at all when you're talking about the extra conditioning that these teams like to throw in, especially in the preseason, when kids should be learning plays and like getting faster and hopefully maintaining strength. To take all of this information and decide that you're doing Indian runs, or you're again running 110s, or cross ice skates or Herbies or gassers, like it blows my mind. So when you're putting together like preseason and in-season practice plans, just understand all this and then try to figure out how you can design drills, right, that are going to lead to better outcomes, right, from an effort perspective, from a typical duration perspective, because that's going to be what's in the best interest of the athlete. So if there's one take home from this graphic in this section here, I want you to think it is not beneficial to waste time conditioning when I already know my athlete is going through 4 miles of running, right, throughout the duration of practice, right? Those drills are going to add up to a lot more. Me tacking on an extra mile is going to be absolutely worthless to my athletes, and that's what I want you to take home from this section of this episode here. All right, so if you're still with me, hopefully you've learned a few things. Big one, these conditioning adaptations come on pretty quick. We don't need to spend a whole lot of time trying to get there, especially when you're also like playing and practicing your sport and training in the gym. Conditioning should be the last thing on your mind during the season. Like legitimately, I'm not even kidding. And also it should be that way because those adaptations stick around for quite a while, right? Like, and that's with doing nothing. So you're looking on average like 1 to 4 weeks, with the bulk of them being like 4-ish weeks. You get about 30 days of these adaptations sticking around if you do absolutely nothing, right? So like, don't waste your time during the season conditioning. And I see coaches fall into the trap all the time. I think I mentioned it earlier in this episode, but you start losing games near the end of the season. You look like you can't keep up, and you're like, man, we are not conditioned. We need to condition more. Well, there's no possible way. Look at the duration of like the plays and how many miles you're moving around on the field of play just during each practice, not including games, every week. And there's zero chance that you're not conditioned unless you run like a very bad practice, right? So you're plenty conditioned. What's happening is you don't have the speed endurance. You don't have the strength endurance. You don't have the strength anymore because you've been wasting time, conditioning. That's just the sad fact. I saw it happen at the University of South Florida when I was there. Skip Holtz's first year. He thought all the guys were ill-conditioned, so we would run, I was student athletic trainer and a strength coach assistant, but they would run 16 110s twice a week, right? In addition to practice, in addition to lifts, right? It was because the head football coach thought they were ill-conditioned, but the reality of it was they were a little bit overtrained, but they were also lacking like strength endurance. So, which will lead to speed endurance and all that kind of stuff. So it happens all the time in sports. Like you're not ill-conditioned. You're not going to lose those adaptations if you're practicing and playing, which you should be because you're in season. Then understand the average play duration in a sport. Try to think about the average like outputs in each play for each sport. And that's going to give you a better understanding of like how you should condition when it comes to like being ready for the field of play, right? Running these 110s or skating these herbies, or like in basketball, running suicides. Like these things don't benefit you at all. The output is so low that it's not going to have any positive benefit on your output on the field of play, like when it comes time to play games. So make the drills harder, I guess that would be the only thing. Make the drills and the practices harder and make them mimic the needs for the sport more. And there will be no need to condition. It will be, and it is already, but it will be an even bigger waste of your time to spend that time. I wrote an article, it was a couple years back. I did the math, and like a local team here at the rink that's like 2 minutes from my gym, if they were to spend 10 minutes 10 minutes conditioning at the end of practice, let me back up. If that team was to spend 10 minutes of each practice conditioning, by the end of the season, they will have wasted somewhere in the neighborhood of $6,000 on ice time, right? Doing something that's totally unnecessary if the coach is smart enough to make the drills hard enough and the athletes are disciplined enough to skate hard during those drills. So don't condition during the season. It should be the last thing on your mind. Go balls out on the field or the ice or the court. You're covering plenty of distance. Your output's plenty high, right? And those are the conditioning the conditioning that you'll need, right? There's no better conditioning than playing your sport, right? It's the exact skill movement. It's the exact movement skill. It's the exact energy systems demands and the exact outputs that you're going to need to be able to like excel on the field of play when it comes to playing games. So that's it for today. Hopefully you learned something. I am big anti-conditioning guy. So understand that that's the kind of perspective that I'm taking here. But I think most of it's like backed by like scientific evidence that a lot of the ways that we do things today are just absolutely moronic. Like it's just, we do it because that's how we've done it. And there's no backing as to why we do it that way. Speaking of conditioning, every time I mention these two books, we seem to like sell one or two of them. So go buy a book, Total Hockey Training. There's actually an entire chapter on hockey conditioning in here and why you need to condition a certain way and not condition the ways you have been. Dynamic Effort Method for Athletes. That's a great read if you're somebody who is looking to kind of work with some of your like moderate training age to higher training age athletes and you want to develop not only speed, but like speed endurance. There's a lot of good information in that book. As always, I hope you learned something. I'll link everything in the description that I talked about earlier. For instance, those episodes, some books and some articles that go well with this. And I think that's it. I jumped around a lot there, but I think I covered everything. Hope everybody learned something. Hope everyone has a good rest of your week, and we'll see you next time.
I don't want to hear you, 'cause you cannot master the strength.